So thanks everybody for joining. It's time for the React portion of this and everything to cover that we've released as part of the R2 release for React Land. My name is TJ Van Tol. If you're just joining us, I am a developer advocate on the KendoReact team. And there's a number of things I want to cover today. We've only got a half hour, so I really want to dive right in. So we have form guidelines as well for React. If you were here for Alyssa's section on Angular, you saw those for Angular. We have some similar guidelines for React, so we'll show those. We'll spend the bulk of our time going over all the new components and features that we shipped as well. There's a new sample app I want to point out to you and just point it out as a reference that's available to you. And then as time allows, we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. But I want to start by looking at the form guidelines. And I have a link here, but I think it's actually easier if I just show you where to find this on the documentation. So this is the KendoReact site. This is the docs and demos. And if you go under the components list for the form, you'll see that there's this new section for React form guidelines. And really, this is, to me, just a comprehensive guide over solving any problems that you might have related to forms, including how to use all the different components that we now have, some of which are new for this release that we'll talk about in a minute, as well as problems like how you implement validation using our components, whether that's field validation or form validation, how you lay out different controls. So I'm going to refer back to this when we get into demos here momentarily. But at the moment, I just wanted to tell you that this resource is now out there. It's quite comprehensive. You can find it under the form section, again, React form guidelines. So the guidelines are out there, but I want to spend most of our time today talking about all the new components and features that we are shipping as part of this release. So there's so much that I struggled to put this on one slide. You'll notice that this slide does include more things than Alyssa's similar slide. Not that this is a competition, but if it was a competition, we would probably be winning on the React side of things. So there's a lot here, and there's a lot that we need to cover. You'll see that a lot of this, if you're around for Alyssa's too, you saw that there was a number of new Angular form components. There are for Angular or for React as well, a lot to support those form guidelines, like this chunk here that we'll be going over. Now, if you've seen my talks or my webinars before, you know that I like to show a lot of this in action. So I'm going to switch over to my coding environment in a minute. But before we do that, I want to run one quick poll while I'm sort of setting up my coding environment. So if we could launch this poll for KendoReact, the question we want to ask today is, how did you first hear about KendoReact? So are you either a Telerik customer? Did you find us from a search? Did you hear us from a newsletter mention, through an advertisement, or someone you know that referred you?
It sounded like you said, did you fear us? And I'm like, yes, we fear you, KendoReact.
You know, the Kendoka can be kind of scary if you see him in the full outfit.
I don't know. The rebranded one, though, it's got like very much a cute feel.
That's true.
And I should also mention, Carl and I, we can brag and make people jealous while they're answering this. Like, we've got brand new, straight off the printing press, KendoReact shirts. So
wait,
listen, I don't think you have these for Angular quite yet, do you? So these are.
I'm not seeing you. All I see is a poll, and you're showing a shirt.
Yeah, it might be that when the poll pops up, none of our webcams are shared anymore.
So
I don't think our webcams are. So stop showing your shirt. It's not fair.
So it looks like
so we have.
Oh no! The quick poll answers are up. Stop it.
Yeah, not quite yet. Yeah, but okay, there we go.
A lot of customers.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
A lot of referrals as well, so that's awesome to see as well. So thanks all for coming. And we do need to show, before I switch over to coding, I will show the shirt here, so you can see it to the side. I think the Angular ones are in the works, but
yeah. No, the Angular ones are actively in the works as we speak. Yeah.
All right. So let's switch over and do some coding now. So I've got a little sample app up here that's sort of an empty shell boilerplate app. I like the fictitious company Acme Industries, mostly because they conveniently tend to need exactly the features that we're shipping with each Kendo release, which is just, it's uncanny how that works out.
Yeah, and they're a wonderful customer.
Yeah, it's really just absolute case study for us to use. And you'll see that I had that slide with all the features, the new components and features, and I tossed them in this markdown file. And as I said, there is a lot, so I'm probably going to sort of pick and choose through this And I've also got links out to the docs site to show you a little more comprehensive example of how each of these things work. So for example, if we start with the list view, which is the first of our new components on the list, if you want to use the new list view as part of KendoReact, basically its most basic setting is you just import the component and use it and pass it a list of data. And then if I save this, this actually won't do anything in my application. I'll just see an empty list because I also have to say how to render this item as well. And this is one thing I like about just KendoReact in general, and you'll see this theme as we go throughout a lot of the new features, is that we offer a lot of these sort of extensibility hooks where we're providing you some functionality, but we also give you this sort of hook to customize these controls to meet your needs. So in this case, I say I have a list view. This is basically my data. And for each of my data items, I'm also providing a component for how that data should actually be rendered. So what I'm doing in this case is I'm saying I'm using actually a component we shipped as part of the R1 release for KendoReact, the card component, to actually render each person in this list. And you can see with this, I really like this code just because I find it semantic and quite easy to look at, like a list view and a list of cards. And I get a pretty decent looking app here out of the box. And the list view, to switch over to the documentation, you might like that look by default, but it does provide some more advanced functionality. For example, if you wanted to add paging, so this is a UI that you see on lots of like blogs or product listings and such, where you've just got a list of data and you need to add paging. The list view easily integrates with the KendoReact pager, so you can add paging to your list of data. There's also support for endless scrolling as well. So this is if you're building the next great Twitter or Facebook clone, or you're building any sort of app that has a lot of data that you need to show in a list, you can use these APIs and also support these larger data sets through the use of endless scrolling. So definitely something to check out if you show lists of data in your app, which is a pretty common thing to do. You can check out the list view control that is new as part of this release. So that is the first of our new components. The next sort of chunk, all of these are related to the form guidelines that we looked at earlier. And so because of that, let's switch over to a really simple form that I got started for Acme, which is currently only username and password. And some of this code I have here is something that this form component that we shipped as part of our R1 release. And it provides some functionality that's kind of cool out of the box with really a minimal amount of just hand coding. So for example, I've got this form. This is coming from KendoReact, as well as these fields that are coming from KendoReact as well. And when I fill out this form with my super secure credentials and submit this, because of this little handler I have here, I can instantly get basically JSON formatted data out of this form, which is handy because if you're building large forms in React today, you might have some code that looks something like this, where you have like some epic state object, or you might have like useState, and you probably spell it correctly in your app. But you might have like 20 of these things, right? Because managing state and forms just turns into a mess really quickly. So one key feature you get just out of the box with a KendoReact form is a saner way of maintaining that state. Like you don't have to do all these on-change handlers, all this state management. You just get a simple callback in the submit, and all the data is aggregated and ready there for you. So that's sort of the step one, the basis that all of this is being built on top of. But there's a lot of new stuff that we shipped in this release to really let you customize these forms to meet whatever needs you have of the apps that you are building. So for example, you can pass in a validator for each of these. So I have a required validator. This is the function I have defined up here that basically says if the value is an empty string, pass back that this is valid, otherwise it returns an error message. And when I submit this, you can see the submission is automatically stopped. And I also get this sort of error highlighting as well. Another thing you can do just in the sort of with this theme of customizability is you can also take this component. So by default, I'm rendering this using the KendoReact input. But if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to customize this further, I wanted to do something a little differently than how KendoReact provides it out of the box, I can provide this pretty minimal wrapper of the input. So this is the same KendoReact input, but I added a little bit of extra functionality. So I said, okay, if this field has been touched, if the user's interacted with it, and there's a validation message, let me use one of the new KendoReact label components, the error, to show a little error message under the field. So a little simple extensibility, adding in, and I have this ability to show error messages. The same thing, the hint component is also new to KendoReact. So if I go down here and I provided a hint, and the hint could be like, so you got to type it right. This is where your username goes. I'm not a UX expert. You probably shouldn't use that hint for your apps, but you can see that you get this simple little way to these nice little building blocks for building up your forms. And if we actually go out to the form guidelines, so what I'm showing is still fairly simple, just for time's sake. We're not going to go through all 20-some examples that are out here, but these same building blocks can be built up. So for example, if you wanted field level validation on like all of these rich components that we provide in KendoReact, that's something that you can do. If you needed form level validation, that is available to you as well. So again, when you have these form needs, what you want to do is head to the KendoReact docs and demos, find these form guidelines, and that's going to walk you through finding what you need to know. And this like little table of contents is great too, because you can sort of isolate the exact scenario you have and sort of take the code that's relevant to you. So in addition to all this, we covered some of this, like some of the new labels. I have to check these off. Not super OCD, but for things like this, it's nice to just check things off the list as we go through them.
Let's just say you are.
Right. I think everybody's like some degree of OCD, right? It's just where you fall on like the spectrum of things. So in addition to this, there's also a number of new components that are related to forms as well. The first is one of my favorites, the radio button in the radio group. And because I don't know, Carl and Alyssa, have you ever tried to style the built-in browser radio buttons at all? It's like an effort.
Made the mistake of trying to do that before. Yes.
Yeah, I just build out a custom one because you can't. You just can't.
Yeah. And so this is one of my favorites because it lets you just do that, but simple, right? So you can use the radio group individually, but it also integrates into all this other form stuff that we have with KendoReact now. So again, I have a field. This is going to be the same as our input or our username and password. And really all I have to do is say the component I want to render this with is a radio group and provide my name value pairs, essentially what the individual radio buttons should be. And if I submit this form, you'll see that it all gets formatted up for submission. So I don't have to worry about, again, any of the state management, that sort of thing. I could tie this into the validation if I wanted to. And like this gets rendered, it's going to be cross-browser friendly and still be themable and such as well, which, like I said, on your own is quite the task if you've ever went down that path before. So this is another little handy component. You'll see this mentioned throughout the form guidelines as well, the new radio button and radio group controls. So make sure to check that out. And we have so many of these today. Another one that's new for this release is the range slider. Now, the slider has been a part of KendoReact, I think now for several releases. The range slider is new. And again, I like this because it's got a fairly intuitive API. Basically, you just pass it a min, a max, where the starting value should be. And then any labels, so these labels are these things down here that you want to provide on these controls. And I think I mostly see these on shopping sites. So like price filters is probably the most common example. I can't think of any other examples, but it's super handy on like sites like Amazon where I say I want to get the price range that I'm looking for. So if you're building something like this, check out the range slider. It's a fairly, really simple way of implementing that sort of functionality. All right. So we did these two. We're making good progress. Let's see, we're 15 minutes in. I think we can do this. So we did this. The next two components are all based off of showing you progress in your applications, as you might expect. So let's go up to the top of this form and let's pretend, for instance, that Acme is building something far more complex than we can feasibly do today. They're building this sign-up form that's super ambitious. It's like 6 steps. You're providing all this information. And so one thing you might want to do is show your users where they are in this process. And so there are a couple different ways you can do this with our new components. So one, the sort of easiest is just to use the new progress bar component. And for this, again, you just provide a value. The ends are presumed to be 0 and 100, although you can customize that as well. And then you can just say how far along the progress is. So in this case, 50. You can mess with this to do whatever you'd like. You can show a label if you want the user to see the actual specific number. Like if you're providing like a download progress bar and you want to show like 20%, 30%, that sort of thing, that's something you can do as well. You can set this to null. So this I actually find maybe more useful than the progress bar itself, just because it's a super handy just loading indicator. So if you have something that you just want to show the data is loading, this is like a one-liner that makes that dead simple to do. So that's something that might be nice, something you might want to try.
That's a fun little trick that I didn't know about, actually. So I just learned something on our own webinar.
It's pro tips here. It's pro tip day. You can also, if you put the word chunk in front of it and you want a chunk progress bar, essentially, as you might expect, these names are kind of intuitive. It just divides the progress bar into chunks. So you can say how many chunks between 0 and 5, and how many chunks should actually be filled out. So 3, 4, whatever. So this is just how many steps, essentially. Like this is, again, like a multi-phase thing. If you wanted to show users, there's 10 things that need to be done, 8 have been completed. Another just handy one-line component that makes implementing that sort of thing super simple. Now, my favorite way of doing this, though, I saved the best one for last because I'm super clever in how I organize this, is the stepper component. Now, you might have seen this, Alyssa showed this off for Angular, but it's also new to React as well. And what I like about this is that this is probably my favorite API because I think you just sort of get the most bang for your buck with this thing. Because really all you have to do for this thing is you provide it an array of items. And these items are going to be steps in this UI that you see over here. And the other thing you have to provide is just labels and icons, and then also how many steps the user has completed. So 2, 3, whatever the case might be. And you get this UI that I think is actually quite nice, and that I see more and more in modern UIs as well. Like if you do have a multi-step form process, I see these things a lot. And there's also, if I go to the docs for this, you can also show these things. So this is under layout, stepper, and I'm going to go to the orientation demo because you can also change this thing to vertical. And I see this a lot on like tutorial sites, for example, where like on the side of the screen, they're showing how far along you are in a sequence of steps. And this component is just a super elegant API for allowing you to do that fairly easily. All right, so I showed this. Oh man, got to get this right. So we got check, check. So those are all of the new components. Obviously, I covered them kind of quickly, so make sure to check out the documentation if you want to learn more. So I got 10 minutes, and I want to cover at least a little bit about each of the new features that we shipped as well, because some of these are actually quite impressive, and there's quite a lot to them. And the scheduler is one of those. So Acme, what do you know? They happen to have a scheduler in their app. Again, just ultra convenient. And their scheduler is quite simple. And what I want to use their scheduler to do is show how you can now customize the header and footer that appear in this. So I mentioned earlier that a big theme of, well, KendoReact in general, but especially this release, is extensibility. And so if you wanted to configure the footer, what you can do now is just provide like a custom footer through a footer prop. And what you can then do is I can say my custom footer is whatever. So I could return, like, just for example, a div here and with some pizza. And actually, I think I want to do this, scheduler footer. And then if you wanted your scheduler to have pizza in the footer, there you go. Your day is made. You have now solved that important challenge. You can also, though,
as we all do,
exactly. So another thing you can do too is you get past the, VS Code is letting me down. I want props dot. Oh, I don't need the $sign. What am I doing? Alyssa, there's too much Angular still left in me. I want to type $signs when it's not necessary. I need to break myself of this habit. I'm on the better framework now.
That's sad.
It might be because it's a prop and not props.
Okay. Yeah, so see, what I can do is, for example, with this hook or this extensibility API, I get past what KendoReact would have displayed anyways. So this is the normal display. And what's cool about that is that you also then have a spot where you can add your own custom stuff. So all of this is about really flexibility, right? You can take the default footer if that's what you want. You can augment it if that's what you want. You can just kill the footer if you think it's ugly and you don't need that functionality. You can do that as well. So if you're interested in this, the docs are going to go into a lot more detail than I have a chance to do today. So there's demos for both the header and the footer. And there's one example I like here too, because for this example, the footer has a dropdown that can change essentially the length of each slot in here. So if you wanted to give the users the chance to customize something like that, maybe you wanted them to have the ability to highlight different things in the scheduler, that's now something you have sort of an easy API for implementing that sort of thing. So that's pretty powerful for those of you using the scheduler. I know that one was pretty highly requested, so make sure to check that out. Speaking of sort of these extensibility hooks, the drawer has one as well. So if you missed it, the last KendoReact webinar R1 release, we released a new drawer component, and that's actually what I've been using here. And if I go in here and look at the drawer, by default, you actually get this UI by default. So I have no code to make this sort of thing happen, which I think is actually kind of cool in a way, right? I don't have to, it's sort of the best thing of using some of these UI components is you sort of offload the responsibility for this. But we also realize that sometimes in real world apps, you do need control. So that's the idea behind some of these APIs. So one thing you can do is for the item now, this prop is brand new. I can say like custom drawer item. And then in my code, I'll go up here and put that in. And essentially it just gives you, you'll see that this is similar to the scheduler and some of these other things that we've looked at, where you have the ability to just completely change up the control of the display. And in this case, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just spitting out the text, but obviously you could build up your own DOM, your own styling here, while still letting KendoReact control sort of the hard parts, like when this thing shows and the animation and all of that sort of thing as well. So that is, take that out for now. That is the drawer. All right, I think we're gonna make it. We got two more to cover. The next one is the,
got it.
The next one is the grid, and there is a new checkbox filter. So this one I'm just going to show on the documentation. So if you want to find this, we've got the grid section of the docs. This is under columns and column menu. And column menus are not new to the KendoReact grid, but these checkbox filters are. And this is one of those things that as a user, I can totally see the value of this. So if I'm looking at this grid and pretend there's thousands of things in here, and I quickly want to see, well, let me show all of these where, say, discontinued is true. It's just a really sort of simple UI element you now have to give users a quick way of filtering this data. And if you look in here, I can find it. This is, our APIs we at least try to make them pretty consistent. You'll see that there's a column menu sort of hook where you pass a component. So you pass a column menu. And the real magic happens here. This is the bit that's new, this grid column menu checkbox filter. So again, if you're interested in this and implementing this, check the grid and then the column section and this multi-column page for details on that.
So there's a question, I don't know if you boys know the answer. Is there a plan for adding show hide to column menu?
That's a good question. Like I'm guessing on like if you wanted the column itself to completely go away.
Yeah, we actually should have a demo on that, I believe. It's escaping me off the top of my head, but somewhere in this column menu area, I believe there's a demo that showcases that. It essentially works with a custom column menu that just goes through the column collection and provides a quick and easy way to show or hide something, right? So it lists it.
Oh, you're saying that's like already possible?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It should be. It might be that it's just a couple of additional lines of code, but it's very similar to what you see here, right? Where we had a specific type to help out with that. You'll be able to find something similar with the showing and hiding of columns. The reason that we expose this new filtering mechanism as a way to offer filtering. It's just that data list, if we just have true or false, that's fairly easy, right? Those are two different options we can choose from. But if we started going into the product name, where we might have tens, 20, hundreds, and these are a lot, right? But that needs to be populated somehow. So rather than just assuming based off of the data that the grid gets, especially if it's data coming from a server where you might not know the full data collection, you have the ability to populate that just with the unique values, and then the grid will automatically work with applying the filter down to everything within that list. So that's why you see that it's a similar thing on the show and hide columns, because there might even be some columns that you don't want users to be able to hide. So that it gives you the flexibility of just being able to structure that yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I didn't know that was already a thing. Cool.
And the last on our list is the TreeList. So I want to make sure to show this, because this is actually the component that we updated the most as part of this release. And there are a number of new features for this. So you'll find this under the TreeList section in the documentation. The one thing is new is virtual scrolling for rows. So we actually had column virtualization before, and you can now do row virtualization as well. So if you are the sort of person that you have these massive data sets for your tree list, and we have a number of new features to help support that. Virtualization is one of them. Another one is paging. So just above this, there's a demo that can help you out implementing this. But if you have a tree list and you have so much data that your users need paging, we now implement or integrate with the KendoReact pager functionality so that you can add those to your tree list as well. There is drag and drop. This one actually, I could sort of see some pretty fun things you might be able to do with this. So if you have some hierarchical, which is a hard word to say, data, and you want your users to be able to sort of reorder these things and keep the hierarchy, this is actually kind of cool. And to show this, what I'm going to do is there's a developer advocate in here, and I am going to promote them all the way up to be under the CEO. So Amos just got a pretty good promotion. He just moved up 3 levels. But anytime you need to sort of give your users a way of sorting that sort of thing, it's kind of a cool thing to do. There are aggregates, and I've got like 2 minutes, so I'm going to blaze through this. Aggregates, basically just stuff on the bottom of the screen. You can export to PDF and Excel now from TreeList. That's actually some of my favorite pieces of functionality, because I've never researched how that's actually done. So to me, it's just complete black magic. But anytime you need to do that, it's super useful. That's also in here. So some of these exports as well. So make sure to check that out. Definitely see some of the new stuff we've shipped as part of the tree list. And then to just sort of wrap things up, as that was our demo, I know I mentioned that there is a new coffee warehouse sample app. So I want to show you this if you just need to, if you want to screenshot some of these URLs or check them out. It's a new demo that we have available showing a number of our components in action. And a big focus of this demo was also to show a number of our components working together. So things like the charts working together with date range pickers, there are schedulers, some of the new form controls are in there. So this is just another one that's good to bookmark and to keep available if you need it. And I think we're just about out of time. For hello to all the jQuery people showing up. We're just about to start that, but I know we do have one last poll that we want to show for KendoReact. So if we could toss that up. And again, then after this poll, we'll move on to transition over to the jQuery stuff. So, do we have the poll up?
It is up, yes.
We do.
Okay.
So the poll, I can read it since I have it in front of me here, is how do you plan to use KendoReact in 2020? And this is please select all that apply. So this is similar if you've been in the other sessions so far. We asked a very similar question, but is it in a public-facing app, an internal application, a personal project, or more just to learn or as a reference, or I'm not planning to use it? And if you're a jQuery person just joining, that might be your option. But for those of you that are sitting in here, just, those are your options. If a couple of apply, then you can just check those off. So we'll leave this up here for a little bit longer.
Looks like, man, public facing versus internal apps. It was the same thing with Angular. It's just sort of a neck and neck.
I'm always surprised by how many people still say to learn as a reference. That's really interesting.
For sure. But it's kind of cool because you can build some powerful stuff pretty quickly. And it looks like the results, public facing one, just edging out internal apps. But it's cool to see some variety. So just to wrap up the Kendo React section, hopefully you found it's interesting. If you have any other questions, I'm going to pop over and look at the questions. And again, we have team members on the line. I have some links here for where you can learn some additional stuff. But I think that's it for React. So Carl, do you want to take control here and we can get started with the jQuery stuff?
Yeah.